A well-dressed man pushes open the door of a small-town diner, rain dripping from his coat, his son hiding behind him like a shadow. The bell above the door gave a tired jingle, barely heard over the steady drum of rain against the windows. Grant Miller paused just inside, scanning the room with the practiced caution of a man used to control. His coat was damp and clung to his shoulders, his hair slightly mussed from the wind. He held the door open a moment longer for his son, a small boy with oversized headphones and wide, startled eyes. The diner, maple and steam, gave off the sleepy warmth of places that rarely changed. Vinyl booths cracked with age lined the windows. The smell of bacon mingled with old coffee and pumpkin pie. A faded Thanksgiving wreath sagged on the front window, its orange ribbon darkened by moisture. Paper placemats on each table advertised holiday turkey deals and a coming Santa parade. Mr. Jack, folded into his usual spot at booth 4, looked up from his folded Willow Creek Tribune and nodded once in recognition, not of the man, but of the mood. He'd seen storms like this before, not the kind outside. "Take any booth you like," called Josie Harper from behind the counter, her voice practiced and warm. She was drying her hands on a towel, ponytail frayed, and apron smudged with flour. She smiled instinctively, unaware her tone had made the boy flinch. Caleb clung tighter to Grant's hand, pulling slightly away from the sound. Grant leaned down. "Easy," he murmured. "We won't stay long." They moved to a booth near the window, where the rain distorted the outside world into gray watercolors. Grant eased Caleb into the seat, removing his headphones and replacing them with a rubber toy from his pocket, one shaped like a soft blue dinosaur. But the diner was alive with small sounds, a clatter of dishes in the kitchen, a laugh too loud from the back corner, the hiss of bacon on a flat top. Caleb stiffened, his shoulders hunched. Then he let out a soft hum, one he used when the world pressed too hard. Josie approached with 2 menus tucked under her arm. "Morning, can I get you some?" A metal tray hit the counter behind her. The boy screamed. Caleb shot out of the booth like he'd been stung, hitting the tile floor with a soft thud. His arms flailed. His voice rose in a pitch too sharp for words. His fingers beat the floor beside him. Grant was on his knees in a second, trying to speak, trying to reach. "Buddy, breathe. Caleb, look at me." But the boy didn't. He couldn't. His world had folded in. Then someone else dropped down beside him. Josie's apron brushed the floor as she knelt, slow and careful, her voice lowered, not babying, not commanding. "Hey there, sweetheart." She pulled a card from her pocket, laminated, worn at the corners. It showed a cartoon face smiling under the word breathe. Caleb's eyes, wild and unfocused, caught the shape, froze. She tapped the card once, then placed her hand on her chest and exaggerated an inhale, long and slow. Out again. Caleb followed shakily. "That's it," she whispered, like it was just between the two of them. "Good boy." Grant's jaw clenched. He was frozen, half standing, half kneeling, unsure whether to intervene or let it unfold. Josie slid her hand gently into her apron pocket again and produced a soft red rubber frog. She set it on the tile between them. Caleb reached out with both hands, trembling, and clutched it tight. Grant's voice broke through, hard-edged. "What do you think you're doing?" Josie looked up, startled, but calm. "I was just—" "You don't touch my son without permission." Mr. Jack lowered his newspaper slowly. The clink of spoons in coffee mugs quieted. "I wasn't touching him," Josie said evenly standing. "I was reaching him." "You think I don't know how to handle my own child?" Grant's tone turned cold, sharp with something older than the moment. Josie didn't flinch. "Sometimes it's not about handling, it's about understanding." Caleb was upright now, sitting cross-legged with the frog pressed against his chest. His head tilted, watching the 2 adults in stillness. Grant straightened slowly, brushing off his knees. He tossed a folded bill onto the table, too much, but meant to end the moment. "We're done," he muttered. He scooped Caleb up into one arm, the toy still in his son's hands, and turned toward the door. Josie didn't move. just stood in the space he'd occupied. The bell jangled again as they left. Rain gusted inward before the door clicked shut. Mr. Jack cleared his throat. Josie bent down and picked up the laminated card from the floor, wiped it on the edge of her apron. As they leave, Caleb turns and silently stares back at Josie. She watches the door close behind them and murmurs, "Poor kid." Caleb clutches a folded napkin in his tiny hand, a napkin with 2 stick figures drawn in purple crayon. The house was still in that aching kind of way where even the refrigerator seemed to hum softer. It was Sunday, a full week since the holiday had passed, and yet the scent of reheated turkey still clung faintly in the air. Outside, the trees stood stripped and skeletal, their branches tapping lightly against the windows whenever the wind picked up. Inside, the Miller home was sleek and pristine, granite countertops, recessed lighting, cold hardwood floors. Not a single holiday decoration remained. Caleb sat cross-legged by the window in his pajamas, pressing his fingers gently against the cold glass. The napkin remained crumpled in one hand, softened by days of handling. Grant, standing at the stovetop, stared blankly into a pot of untouched stuffing. The microwave beeped behind him. He'd forgotten he'd even turned it on. A faint hum reached his ears, low and tuneless, but familiar. He glanced over. Caleb was humming again, the same tune that had drifted from the old jukebox at the diner. Josie had been refilling coffee cups when it played. Grant remembered the moment, mostly because Caleb had stopped rocking and listened for nearly 20 seconds. It had felt like forever. Grant turned off the burner, no longer pretending to care about the food. He leaned against the counter and watched his son, who was still tracing invisible lines on the window. One foot gently tapped, a habit he'd picked up when he was nervous or trying to calm himself. There was a knock at the door. Grant opened it to find his sister already stepping inside. "You don't answer texts now?" Diane said, brushing her coat sleeves clean of invisible dust. She carried a grocery bag and the familiar scent of lavender lotion. "I've been busy," Grant muttered. Diane scanned the house quickly. Her gaze softened slightly when she saw Caleb by the window. "He looks tired." "We both are." She unpacked the bag on the counter, pre-cut fruit, 2 frozen lasagnas, and a bottle of wine. "You're not eating, let me guess. Takeout and cold coffee?" Grant didn't answer. He walked over and picked up a folded piece of paper from the kitchen table. It was Caleb's drawing, the one from the napkin, now pressed flat and taped to a sheet of printer paper. The crayon lines were a bit smeared, but the figures were clear. A boy and a woman with a ponytail. In the corner, scrawled in shaky letters, Josie. "Still thinking about her?" Diane asked. Grant gave a small shrug. "I get it," she continued, taking the wine opener from the drawer. "She helped in the moment, but don't let someone get too close just because they were nice once." He looked up. "She didn't ask for anything." "Not yet," Diane said, pouring a modest glass. "But look, I asked around. No full degree, no certifications, just a year or so in speech therapy, then dropped out." Grant frowned. "Why?" "She went back home to care for her mom, apparently. Cancer, I think. Small-town stuff. But Grant, don't forget who you are and who you're protecting." That last sentence echoed more than it should have. That evening, Grant sat on the edge of Caleb's bed, watching him breathe. The napkin was there again, clutched tight against his chest. Grant reached to pull the covers higher, and Caleb stirred but didn't wake. He walked quietly into his office and turned on the small lamp. On the edge of his desk sat a folder from the diner's Thanksgiving charity event, the one he donated to through his firm. Inside were resumes, paper menus, and a few handwritten notes. Josie's application was clipped to the back. He scanned it again. 2 years speech therapy assistant program, Green Valley College, left early for family care. 8 years in service roles, waitress, bakery assistant, strong community references. There was no pretense, no exaggeration, just the facts. The next day, as Grant drove Caleb to his speech therapy appointment, they passed Maple and Steam. Caleb pressed his nose to the window, his small palm leaving a print on the glass. "She's not there today," Grant said gently, even though he knew Caleb couldn't answer. But Caleb's head turned anyway, just slightly, just enough to linger. That night, after putting him to bed, Grant passed by the living room and paused. The small whiteboard they sometimes used for practice lay on the floor. Erased, blank. In the kitchen, he reheated coffee out of habit and poured it into the mug Josie had used. It still smelled faintly like peppermint. By midnight, he couldn't sleep. He wandered into Caleb's room again. Caleb was awake this time, sitting up quietly, holding the napkin and staring at it. His fingers traced the same line over and over, under the word Josie. Grant leaned against the door frame, something in his chest tightening. He turned and walked into his office. The business card from the diner was still on the desk where he'd left it after the fundraiser. He picked up the phone, staring at the numbers. His thumb hovered. Grant stands by the phone, hesitates, then finally dials the number on the back of the diner's business card. Josie's hand hesitates over the doorbell of a house that looks like it costs more than her yearly salary. The porch beneath her boots gleamed faintly with yesterday's drizzle. Decorative hedges framed the door, trimmed to the inch. The welcome mat was spotless. Josie shifted her weight, the strap of her canvas tote digging into her shoulder. Her fingers hovered an inch above the brass bell, cold despite her gloves. She almost turned away, but Caleb's crayon drawing, now tucked in her tote bag, steadied her resolve. She rang. Inside, Grant glanced up from the living room window. He had been standing there longer than he realized, watching for her car, then scolding himself for watching. He cleared his throat and opened the door before she could knock again. "Hi," she said. "Come in, shall," he replied, stepping aside. Josie took in the house. Beautiful, clean, too quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't soothe but watches. Caleb appeared at the top of the stairs, his socks mismatched, a stuffed turtle dangling from one hand. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Hey, buddy," she said warmly, crouching to his level as he came down slowly. "Look what I brought." She pulled a laminated card from her bag, a simple sketch of two hands touching with the word friend beneath it. "This means friend," she said, signing as she spoke. Caleb stared at the card, then at her hands. Slowly, deliberately, he mirrored the sign, his fingers fumbling slightly, but close. Josie grinned. "Perfect." Grant stood behind them, arms folded, trying not to let the emotion reach his face. "You can use the living room," he said, gesturing. "Whatever you need." The three of them moved into the main room. Josie spread out a small mat and took out her teaching tools. Laminated signs, a tiny whiteboard, a pouch of markers, and a thermos that smelled faintly of peppermint. When she unscrewed the lid, Caleb dropped to the floor beside her, legs crossed like hers, waiting. She drew a simple house on the whiteboard. "This is home," she said, tapping the picture. She repeated the sign, shaping the roof with her hands. Caleb stared for a second, then tapped the whiteboard twice. Then he smiled. Josie clapped softly, just once. "That's right." They continued like that, slowly, steadily. Caleb learned the signs for play, again, and thank you. Each time he got one right, Josie praised him just enough, not with big fanfare, but with the quiet assurance that someone believed he could do it. Grant watched from the kitchen doorway, arms still folded, but now with less tension. He found himself studying her more than his son, her patience, the way she adjusted her pace to match Caleb's, the way she didn't rush silence. Caleb held up the whiteboard suddenly. He looked at Josie, then crawled over to the coffee table, scribbled something slowly, and returned. She read it aloud, her voice soft. "I like Dad." Grant blinked. For a second, he couldn't breathe. Josie looked up at him. "He's talking," she said, her voice hushed, reverent. "In his way." Grant nodded once. His hands had clenched without realizing. He rubbed the inside of his wrist where an old watch used to rest, his father's, now worn only on big days. He'd put it on this morning without thinking. Caleb climbed to his feet and did something neither adult expected. He took Josie's hand. Then he walked to Grant and took his too. Then he looked at both of them, smiling. Not his usual half-smile, but one full of light. They stood there, the three of them, in an imperfect little triangle of warmth, bound not by words, but by something just as strong. Josie packed up slowly. Caleb sat on the floor nearby, signing again repeatedly, as if hoping to delay goodbye. She knelt, zipped her tote, and ruffled his hair. As Josie prepares to leave, Caleb clings to her coat sleeve. "Same time next week?" she asks. Grant nods, almost a smile. The Sunday visit feels almost normal until Diane arrives early and asks to talk privately. The rain had started again, gentler this time, tapping out a rhythm on the kitchen skylight. Inside the Miller home, Caleb's laughter echoed faintly from the living room. He was crouched beside Josie, lining up a row of cards labeled with signs: play, music, more. Josie's thermos sat on the counter behind her, steam still rising from the peppermint tea inside. It was the same battered metal one her mother used to carry during long hospital shifts. She'd kept it as a kind of talisman. She had told herself more than once that it carried good energy. She didn't see Diane standing just inside the entryway, arms crossed, watching her in silence. Grant appeared moments later, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "You're early," he said. Diane gave a tight smile. "I figured it was time we talked, privately." He hesitated, then nodded toward his office. They walked down the hall, door clicking shut behind them. Josie turned slightly, sensing the shift in the air but not the reason. Inside the office, Diane pulled out her phone. "I wasn't going to say anything," she began, "but I heard something you need to hear." She pressed play. The recording was scratchy, clearly captured from across a diner counter, but Josie's voice was unmistakable. "He's rich. If I play this right, maybe I won't have to worry about money ever again." Grant froze. The words sat heavy in the air. "She was joking," Diane said, softly but firmly. "But it didn't sound like a joke to me." He didn't answer. The fridge hummed faintly in the kitchen. A clock ticked above the fireplace. Somewhere nearby, a toy hit the floor with a dull thud. Back in the living room, Josie handed Caleb a card that said, "Music." He pointed to it, then reached for the old radio sitting near the wall. She smiled and turned the dial gently until a soft jazz tune came through. Caleb rocked contentedly, tapping the card. Grant returned, his expression unreadable. Josie looked up. "Everything okay?" He didn't respond right away. She stood, brushing her hands on her jeans. "He signed 3 new words today," she said. "He's starting to anticipate them now, which is really good. We need to talk." His tone clipped the end of her sentence in half. Josie blinked. "Okay, sure." Grant pulled out his phone and held it up. "Just listen." The moment the recording started, her face changed. Confusion, then alarm. "That's not what I said," she whispered. "Didn't sound like a stranger edited it," he said, voice cool. "I was making fun of myself," she tried. "It was sarcasm. Look, you're not even hearing the rest of what I said after that." Grant didn't flinch. "I trusted you with him and me." Josie stepped back. "Grant." But the air between them had shifted. Frozen. Behind her, Caleb stood silently, toy frog forgotten by his feet. His brows pinched, head tilted. Josie turned toward him. Kneeling, she cupped his cheek gently. "You're so brave, little one." She stood slowly, not meeting Grant's eyes this time. She picked up her tote and thermos, her hand shaking slightly. At the door, she paused as if to say something more, but then thought better of it. She stepped outside. Josie stands in the rain, coat unzipped, stunned. Behind her, the porch light goes out. Caleb hasn't signed or drawn in days. The house is quiet, too quiet, even for Grant. He moved through the rooms without purpose, each step echoing louder than it should. The coffee in the pot had gone cold 3 hours ago, but he poured it anyway, then set the mug down untouched beside the sink. Outside, sleet coated the bare trees in a thin sheen of ice. Inside, the house seemed frozen in its own way. Grant found himself in Caleb's room again. The boy lay curled on his side, facing the wall, the frog toy resting limply near his pillow. The whiteboard, once filled with careful scrawls and crayon doodles, leaned against the foot of the bed. It was blank. He knelt down, picked it up, and stared at the faint outline where "I like Dad" had once been, now wiped away with time, or maybe intention. He didn't know which was worse. Later that evening, Diane arrived with a casserole she knew neither of them would eat. "I came to check in," she said quietly, setting it on the counter. She didn't offer more until Grant met her eyes. "I listened to the full clip," he said. His voice was low, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. Diane froze. "She wasn't mocking me," he continued. "She was defending me. You cut it short." "I didn't know the rest mattered," she said, her voice small. "I was trying to protect you." "You didn't protect anyone," he said. "You just broke something we didn't know we needed." She nodded, blinking fast. "I'm sorry." Grant didn't answer. He turned toward the hallway. That night, after tucking Caleb in, he sat on the edge of the boy's bed for a long time. Caleb didn't speak or sign, just turned slightly toward the window where the Christmas lights from a neighbor's house blinked faintly through the sleet. "We're going to find her," Grant whispered. The next morning they packed a bag, just the essentials, some clothes, Caleb's frog, a juice box, the folded napkin drawing that now lived between the pages of a picture book. Grant strapped Caleb into the back seat and started driving. They began with the next town over, then the next. At diners, he asked around. "Do you know a woman named Josie? About this tall, brown hair, kind eyes?" Most shook their heads politely. Some didn't look up at all. They stopped at gas stations where old men played cards and ate vending machine jerky. At one, a lady behind the counter remembered her. "Worked here a few days after quitting that other place. Left real quiet." In a small town called Brookvale, they passed a toy drive sign taped to a lamppost. A red wreath hung crookedly over the community center door. Caleb barely glanced at it. He was too busy clutching the napkin, lips pressed tight. The sun dipped lower each day, disappearing by 5, and Grant began to wonder if he'd gone mad, chasing someone with no phone number, no address, just a memory and a boy who no longer smiled. But on the third day, they rolled into a town whose main street curved gently past a grocery, a barber, and a bakery. A faded sign over the door read, "Loretta's Pies." Grant parked on instinct. Something about the warm glow in the windows pulled him in. They stepped inside, and the scent of cinnamon and brown sugar wrapped around them like a blanket. Caleb tugged his hood down slowly. His eyes scanned the room, then stopped. Behind the counter, wearing a flour-dusted apron, was Josie. She didn't see them at first. She was wiping down a tray, hair pulled back loosely, sleeves pushed up, focused on a burn mark on the pan's edge. She looked tired but whole, like someone who had finally found quiet. Grant couldn't speak. In a moment that stole the air from the room, Caleb let go of his father's hand and ran forward, arms wide, shouting clear and loud, "Home!" The bakery goes silent. Josie drops her tray. Her hand flies to her mouth. The metal clattered against the tiled floor, but she didn't move. Not yet. Caleb stood in the center of the room, arms wide, face radiant, the words still echoing, "Home." Josie stepped around the counter like someone waking from a dream. She dropped to her knees and caught him in her arms before she could think, before her heart could catch up. "You said a word," she whispered, her breath shaking. "You really said it." Caleb buried his face in her shoulder, fingers clinging tightly to the sleeve of her sweater. From behind them, Grant stood motionless just inside the door, still damp from the road. He hadn't spoken since they arrived. He hadn't needed to. A piece of paper slipped from Caleb's jacket as he moved. Josie reached to catch it. A crayon drawing, creased but intact. 3 stick figures stood beneath a crooked roof. Above them, the word "home" floated in purple. She looked up. Grant was already walking toward them, slowly, eyes locked on hers. He knelt beside them. "I made a mess," he said softly, voice raw, "but I'm here. I want to be better." Josie didn't reply, not at first. Her fingers brushed a streak of flour from Caleb's cheek. "I'm not asking for another chance," Grant added. unless it comes with 1,000 more after it. She laughed through a sob. You don't even have a ring. Tomorrow, he said, or a pie tin today. Their foreheads touched. Outside, winter hadn't quite let go, but inside Loretta's pies, spring was already beginning. The wedding took place under an ancient oak tree on Grant's property. The grass was still damp from morning dew, and the sky wore that soft, new blue color that only came in April. Wildflowers danced at the edge of the field. Lace tablecloths rustled gently on picnic tables. No formal chairs, no aisle, just blankets, boots, and laughter. Loretta, wrapped in a knitted shawl and carrying a tattered book of poetry, stood between Josie and Grant with a grin that hadn't faded since morning. You ready? She asked, eyes twinkling. Josie glanced at Caleb, who stood beside her in suspenders and grass-stained shoes, holding a small pillow with nothing on it. He'd insisted on it anyway. Grant took Josie's hands. More than ready. The ceremony was short, but nothing was missing. Mr. Jack, in his best pressed flannel, gave Josie a wink when she passed. Someone cried when Loretta forgot her place and started again with a laugh. Caleb tugged on Grant's sleeve halfway through to hand him a dandelion. No one minded when Loretta finally said, "You may kiss the bride." Grant didn't hesitate. As their lips met, Caleb twirled in the grass, arms outstretched. "My family!" he shouted, spinning until he fell laughing onto his back. Everyone froze. Even the birds seemed to pause. Josie dropped to her knees beside him, tears bright as the sun in her eyes. That evening, the three of them sat on the porch swing, a quilt tucked around their legs. The stars emerged one by one, as if called to witness the quiet miracle of their beginning. In the distance, Hope Haven's new roof glinted faintly. A small wooden plaque hung above the front door, freshly carved. For those learning to speak, however they can. Grant reached for Josie's hand. Caleb slept between them, one foot curled under Josie's leg, the other resting on Grant's thigh. His thumb still held the corner of the napkin drawing. A hush fell. Then, a shooting star blazed across the night sky, bright and silent and certain. Josie caught her breath and pointed. "Not a wish," she whispered. "A promise." Sometimes healing begins not with grand gestures, but with a quiet word whispered in trust. A boy once locked in silence, a woman underestimated by her past, and a man afraid to hope, found one another not through perfection, but through patience and kindness. When we look past appearances and lean into compassion, we may find that what we thought was broken was simply waiting to be seen. Like a porch light glowing through the rain, a small act of goodness can guide someone home. And if this story stirred something in you, perhaps today is the right day to pass that light on.